Superhumanize. Accelerated evolution.
Welcome to Superhumanize. Today, I have the incredible honor of sitting down with not just an esteemed guest, but a dear friend of mine, Hollie McKay. Hollie is an extraordinary individual whose life and work have taken her to the front lines of some of the world's most dangerous and complex conflicts. As a war reporter, geopolitical analyst, and international humanitarian, Hollie has seen the very best and the very worst of humanity. Her journey through war zones, her powerful storytelling, and her ability to connect with people from every walk of life make her one of the most compelling voices of our time. Her latest book, The Dictator's Wife, is a stunning piece of fiction that weaves together the complexities of power, love, and identity in ways that reflect the deepest truths of the human experience. We'll dive into how her extensive background in journalism and her firsthand experiences with global conflicts shaped the narratives in her novel. But our conversation doesn't stop there. Hollie recently underwent a profound personal journey with what is considered the most powerful known psychedelic, Iboga, in Mexico, that provided her with profound insights into her own psyche and the human condition. We'll explore what she learned from this experience and how it intersects with her work and life philosophy. And as if that was not enough, Holly is also navigating the beautiful, transformative world of motherhood. She's a new mom to a beautiful baby girl, and we'll talk about how this new chapter has reshaped her views on vulnerability, strength, and hope. In this episode, we're not just unpacking Holly's professional accomplishments, we're exploring the very essence of what it means to be resilient, to find light in the darkest places, and to live a life of purpose and passion. So, whether you're seeking inspiration from Holly's remarkable journey or practical insights on resilience and communication, I know you'll find something truly valuable in this conversation. I am deeply honored to have her on the show and even more honored to call her my friend. Holly, welcome back. It's so good to have you on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So many things have happened. Oh my gosh. I remember in the
Mm.
last episode we recorded, we, amongst other, spoke about your brilliant book, Only Cry for the Living. And you have since then broadened your work. You just recently published a brilliant book, The Dictator's Wife, which is actually a work of fiction. And it is incredible storytelling. It is a profound exploration of power, of love, also of identity, living within suffocating confines of an authoritarian regime. And I found your main character, Anna, is it really it was riveting to read a character that is just so deeply human, symbolically extremely rich. And it just showcased for me, and we've known each other for many years now. It's been such a privilege to call you friend. It just for me exemplified your profound understanding of the human condition. And also, it fascinated me how you depicted these intersections of personal life and political life. So first off, congratulations to an incredible book, and I highly recommend to read.
Oh, thank you. That means so much coming from you. Thank you. I really
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely, Holly. And I, of course, mentioned it in the introduction just right now before our conversation. And I'd also like to talk a little bit more extensively in this conversation about it. I'm really curious, also, as a fellow writer, how did your experiences in war zones and also your deep engagement with the complexities of power and the loss of power, how did that inform your creation of your main character? And was there maybe a particular moment in your own life's experience during your work as a reporter that directly inspired the character?
Yeah, first of all, it was an undertaking that I did that I didn't really plan to see the light of day. It was more just I wanted to do it as a creative exercise. I think I started it was probably around 2019, maybe. It was a long time ago that I had this idea of wanting to just explore something different. And I think my first love was fiction writing as a child. And then once I became a journalist and was writing other books and articles and really moved away from that. And I missed some of that creativity. But what I wanted to do was they say write what you know about. And so what I knew about was war and dictatorships and foreign countries. And so I wanted to explore that in a fictional sense, but use my on the ground experience that I had. So use my knowledge of places, specifically in the Middle East. A lot of it I felt very inspired in terms of was Syria, but there was also elements of Iraq and Saudi Arabia and just other parts of the Middle East. But I didn't want it to be a specific place that we knew. I wanted it to be somewhere that we thought we knew, but it was a country of its own. So hence being Turkana in the book. So it was a really challenging exercise. And I will say I found it so hard. I think people from the outside have a vision of fiction as being so much easier than nonfiction. You just get to sit at your desk and with your computer and write away. But it was so much more than that because you really have to, even though you have a certain amount of knowledge, but you really have to dive to these other parts of your brain and that really creative side and put it together. And because the book has so many sort of twists and turns and unexpected developments, you really have to make sure that every T is crossed and every I is dotted in that it all adds up to something at the end and you want to give those clues, but you don't want to give away too much. And so it's this really trying to find the balance of what is too much, what is not enough, and how can I make this all come together where people go, oh, how I get it. And so that was really challenging. And so I would do a draft and then read through it again and be like, oh, hang on, this bit doesn't make sense because this doesn't mean it here. So it really just was a lot more work than I was anticipating. And really, it was a big challenge to get that all together in a cohesive sense. But I enjoyed the writing process. Again, it's a really difficult, especially with fiction, when you have the principle of show, not tell. I think in nonfiction, you can get away with that a little bit more because someone will say something. And so you're directly quoting them. Whereas in fiction, you have to be a lot more stylistic and strategic about the way that you use dialogue and scenes. And yes, you have to show, not tell what the audience what's going on. And that is really challenging. So that is, yeah, is definitely it. My hat off to fiction writers because it's not a matter of sitting at your desk and just inventing things. It's so much more than that. And I love the exercise. And
Mhm.
I hope to do it again. I hope there'll be more in that sort of series someday.
Yes, and hat off to you as well as a fiction writer. And you actually published your first work of fiction when you were just how old, Holly?
Oh my gosh, I think I was 13, 12 or 13. So
Yeah.
again, I was a kid who just loved to write and create things. And yeah, I didn't expect things to see the light of day, but that was just how I enjoyed spending my time. So yeah, that was a blast from the past.
Yes, that's awesome. And you know what I love as an avid reader of fiction as well is that I have this understanding, the sense that fiction often provides a lens through which we can view the truths of our reality, and sometimes with even more clarity than reality itself may provide. And so you spoke about the challenges of writing fiction. What I'd also like to know is what did you find liberating using fiction to explore these themes of power and oppression that you've encountered in real life?
Yeah, I think being able to take even scenes of things that I've encountered and you take that creative license to take them a little bit further and to go a little bit deeper with the characters. Oftentimes, when you are working in situations abroad, even if you are there for several months, you're still only getting a snippet of somebody's life. And so I think what makes fiction work, and also really what makes nonfiction work, but it's the characters. And so you have this opportunity with fiction to be able to go deep into characters and really evolve them. And so I think that was an interesting part because you can take snippets of different people, and create people that maybe don't exist in this form in real life, but you can bring them to life. And there's something very liberating about that is building up entire human beings and lives and backstories and that interplay with characters, I think was something I found very liberating. And being able to put them in situations that had a nugget of truth or something that maybe I'd been in or experienced or seen or heard about, but flesh that out a little bit more and really just take it one step further. And instead of, leaving a scene as I would maybe in real life, once I would leave a refugee camp, for example, in fiction sense, you can stay there for a little bit longer and hear a little bit more and understand a story just to a different depth because you have that creative license. And so that was liberating because you're not beholden to the sort of facts and figures and time constraints that often come from crafting something nonfiction, especially as a war reporter where you're constantly on the move.
Hmm. And to your point, saying that obviously certain things you've experienced have incited also certain things that you wrote, how does The Dictator's Wife reflect on certain realities you've witnessed in your journalistic careers? As in, are there certain things that you took from what you experienced, either with particular individuals or particular settings that we can find again in this work of fiction? Could you disclose?
I think one thing that really comes to mind with that is how war can be viewed from a very different lens depending on where you are situated, and that can be physically situated and who you're associated with. For example, in the book, Anna and her characters, they're connected to this presidential palace in Syra, which is the capital of Takana, a Middle Eastern island. And they're hearing when they're live in the US and in New York, they're hearing about these protests that are happening, this violent crackdown, the sort of the beginning rumblings of war. And then when they visit there, they're obviously guarded and living in that presidential echo chamber. And so they're only seeing the beautiful side of here's a beautiful market, here's the people who support their presidential family, here's the beautiful palace grounds, and everything seems beautiful and untouched. And they're not seeing any of this side that reporters are talking about in the United States. And so, how could this be? And I think that's reflective of a lot of places until you get to the point where you can't ignore it anymore. And in the book, you can ignore it. And then there's that one moment, without giving away too much, but that one moment at that New Year's Eve party when you see the plumes of smoke rising in the air. And that's when these very affluent, very well connected people suddenly come to a realization that there is this thing happening outside their storied grounds. And so I think that really does happen a lot in real life in places like Syria, where the very affluent people can go about their daily lives and go to nightclubs and beautiful restaurants, and they're sheltered in Damascus, which for the most part was a very safe place through the beginning years of war until you get to that point where you can't ignore it anymore, where that the war that may be in distance comes to you. And I think we see that time and time again. So war can be viewed based on whose lens is looking, what lens you are, what part of that country that you might be in, um, and who you're connected to. And I think there's a lot to be said for that because people can say, I went to this country, I didn't see anything, da 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 da. But that's maybe because you were shielded from it for a reason. And I think that that's something I see quite frequently.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting thing to bring up, Holly, because I feel also it is very easy as an outsider, for example, we get certain information in the media that other people may not be able to get. And it's very easy from the outside, for example, to judge a whole country, a whole population as in like, oh my God, all this horrible stuff is going on. Look at what your government or whoever runs the show is doing, where the people in country might not even be aware of it if they're not directly affected of it, especially if their media is controlled, right? So context matters, who you're connected to matters. That's obviously also something your main character experiences in a very profound level. What are just to this is something I love to write to ask writers. What is are some of the things that you admire most in Anna? What are some of the things you despise most in her?
Oh gosh. I obviously admire that. I admire somebody that she has a high degree of loyalty. and is clearly in love with her husband. And I think love can be a messy thing, but there are a lot of admirable qualities in the way that she's willing to stand by him and put her own concerns aside to be that sort of supportive figure. But that also that it's a strength, I think, turns into a weakness when you I think she struggled with a sense of indecisiveness of trying to find out the information and really going to great lengths to find this information, but then being caught in a crossroads of, I think, paralysis about what to do with it until it really became too late where she was herself in the middle of it. So I think that her intentions were pure, and I think that at her heart she was a good character, but then you see the shades of gray that come through, which are in all of us. None of us are purely good or purely bad. And then I think at some point it's that failing to act in time or not getting the information together in time. And that's not necessarily her fault because the situation was very complex. But I think that I think it's that paralysis that's very human that can be a weakness.
Yeah, it is truly a riveting read, and the characters are complex. The story is complex, and as a reader, you get to dive into a world that the vast majority of us has never been exposed to, and hopefully will also never get to experience. Your body of work, Holly, as a war correspondent, is I've admired what you do for so many years now. Your work is nothing short of remarkable. You've witnessed humanity at its most vulnerable and resilient, and you've documented stories that many would find unbearable to witness, let alone to report. And the question that I have is, in the midst of such immense human suffering, where do you find the emotional and also moral compass to not only tell these stories with such integrity as you always have, but to carry them with you? How has bearing witness to these moments of extreme duress shaped your worldview and maybe also your personal life?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that when you are exposed to it, you can't turn away from it in that there's nothing else that I want to be doing with my life than telling these stories or helping people in these desperate situations in some way, whether that is storytelling for now in this chapter of my life or if that evolves into something else in the future. But that really is where my heart is. And I think when I started doing this work very young, I couldn't have imagined embarking on or veering off that career path into something else that might have been more lucrative or more steady or whatever benefits come from that because yeah, you can't look away. And I think that it's a blessing. Certainly has a downside, but for the most part, that's really a blessing, I think, to know what you want out of your life and that legacy that you want to leave behind and the impact that you want to have. And I'm very fortunate to be very clear about that. And I've tried to do other things in my life for financial security or other things, and I'm not able to do them. And so it's very clear to me where my path is. But I think it is ebbs and flows in life in terms of your ability to process things and deal with them. I think that I found a good place with it now, but that's not always the case. I think there has been this parts of my life in doing this work, and particularly if you're away for a long period of time and you're dealing with sort of one trauma after the next. And sometimes as a writer, you can also feel very helpless because yes, you're telling stories and you're building an awareness, but I'm not a doctor, I'm not a human rights lawyer, I can't, there's only so much that I can do to help people in need to tell the story. So that can be a little bit of a struggle. And I think that's what we call moral injury, and that just takes a lot of processing, I think, at times. But at least for me, I found that continuing to remind myself that my job is to tell the story, that I can't expect to give more than that. I can't be the person that is airlifting you out of a horrible situation or some way being the savior because that's not my job. And I have to set up boundaries for that. And that was something very difficult in Afghanistan 3 years ago when the fall happened and I was still there. And so many Afghans are coming to you saying, I need to get out, I need to get out. And your WhatsApp is blowing up. And at first, it's a lot to deal with. And then I really had to just put my foot down and say, I'm sorry, that's not my job. Here's a number of or an email for someone I can refer you to. My job is to tell your story. And I had to be very firm with that because people are desperate. And when they're desperate, they're clinging. And that did really get to me for some time. And I think you have to establish where your boundaries are in the kindest possible way. And I always want to lead with empathy and know that whatever the situation is, people are hurting, they may lash out, they're desperate. And so I always want to lead with empathy in whatever way that I can, but I also have to set boundaries for myself and what I know to be healthy and just do the task at hand and not try to have some sort of God complex that I can do more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I remember when what you were talking about, I was also in a communication with you at that time, and like so many other friends, of course, we're all worried about you, but you were doing what you're called to do. And knowing what I know about you, that you are just also have such a huge heart. You are a full-blown empath and also extremely sensitive person, as in you perceive things that others who are not as sensitive just don't. I think the amount of self-work that you've also done in order to build these boundaries is, I applaud you, because that is no small feat, especially not when somebody has such a huge heart as you do. Yeah. And
Thank you.
mhm, you
But
know,
it's
you
so worth it. And I think when you know what you're doing, it feels like when it feels right, when you feel like you're what you're doing is the right path for you at this chapter of your life, that gives you a boost to find the way to keep going. As I said, I've always believed in the work so much that I have never got to a point where I've said I can't do this. Of course, I've got to a point where I need to take a break and reset and do all those things, but never got to a point where I felt that I couldn't do this and or I was at a yeah, I believe in what I do so much that I have to find the will and the strength, and that's something that's never been lacking for me.
yes, as wonderfully soft, and I mean that in the strongest way possible, how you can characterize softness, because it takes immense strength and courage to be soft. As soft as you are, as fierce you are too. And I think that's just an incredible combination, Holly. And you have witnessed the extremes of human behavior in war zones. And I'm curious to know how that has influenced your perception of humanity's capacity for both destruction and resilience. And also, if there's any particular stories or individuals that you've encountered that continue to resonate with you on a personal level.
Oh my gosh, there's really so many. It's hard to pinpoint one. I think when I realized that and this resonated maybe in a different way than you were expecting. But I think when I going back to what I said about knowing when you need to take a break, and I think for me, I'd been doing so much this work just back to back in different places, and I'd always told myself if you get to that point where you're feeling nothing, not it's not that you're extremely upset or fixating on a situation. For me, it's like I always said, if I get to a point where I'm not responding to a situation that I should be responding to, then I really knew that as a sign to take a step back. And I think for me, the first time I maybe had that realization, I want to say it was a 2019, I think, and I was doing some work in East Africa and Congo and around there, and I was at this big refugee camp, that's on the border in Kenya, and I met a woman, and she, was from the DRC, and she had 2 young boys, and, I mean, she was this incredibly strong, woman. I think she worked in a law office. She wasn't a lawyer, but she worked in a law office, and unfortunately, like so many people in the DRC, and it's very underreported, and it deserves a lot more attention than it gets. It's just long-running sort of conflict and violence there. Rape is a huge weapon of war in that country, and I believe I can't remember the statistic, but at the time it was something like 18 women basically a minute raped there, and it's awful, and There's a huge social stigma that comes from it too, where the women are essentially blamed or shunned or forced out of their communities, which is just a whole other a layer of trauma, really. And so this particular woman that I met at this camp with the boys, she had been raped and as a result had gotten pregnant with her second son, and she had to flee basically on foot and really eh, horrible conditions of what she endured and is trying to escape with one son at the time, and then finding out she was pregnant along this journey of fleeing. And I think for me, she had this, she was incredible and had this incredible story. And I'm sitting there in the hot sun listening to her tell this and just remember just this feeling of just that nothingness. And that to me is more terrifying than being a sort of a sobbing mess. And so that for me was just a realization of needing to that I think I had started to become desensitized, and I never wanted to be desensitized because these stories are so horrific. And to be the best writer that you can be and to do justice to these people, you can't have that sense of feeling removed from the subject or removed from the situation. And that's not me as a person. And I think war reporting really has changed a lot over the years, where yes, it used to be decades ago, we had this vision of a very stoic sort of reporter who didn't show emotion and couldn't show emotion. And that was the way that impartial traditional journalism was. But I really think that's changed. People are looking for that emotion. They're looking for that empathy. They're looking for that human connection. And so, yes, at that point, that's when I just had to really take a step back and give myself the break that maybe I needed to just reset some of those neurological wirings in my brain, so that because you can, I think, overload too much. And it's like a trauma doctor working in a hospital in a war zone, where yes, they have to switch off to be able to do their job. But as a writer, I didn't want to do that, and I didn't feel that was going to do justice to anyone. So I do think it's important to take breaks and give yourself that time to get back on track and then focus on telling the best story from a good place.
That's a really powerful realization, Holly, and thank you for sharing that. I also would like to add that the desensitization, I believe it's more than just that. It's disassociation. It's when things just become so intense and so difficult for our psyche, for our bodies, for our emotions to handle. It's actually a survival mechanism that kicks in and where we disassociate. So it's nothing that we even do consciously. It just happens to protect ourselves, and to be able to recognize that and take a break, that is so incredibly valuable. A lot of people don't even do that. They keep powering through, or they must power through sometimes, being in situations where you cannot change your circumstances. And what you describe, of course, and also what is filtered into your fiction and nonfiction work, is some of the most intense and challenging situations the human experience has to offer. And I remember what also really touched me so much reading your book, Only Cry for the Living, these the witnessing of ordinary people transforming into extraordinary beings in the face of unimaginable adversity. And when you share this in your writing, you actually share something that's so profoundly human, something that speaks to our core resilience and also our capacity for greatness. And what I'd like to learn from you, Holly, from your experience, perhaps also something our audience can take home into their lives, which are hopefully far removed from conflict and war zones. What do you think is the key to unlocking this extraordinary potential within ourselves, especially in times of crisis and uncertainty? And once we unlock it, how can we cultivate this resilience and determination?
Yeah, and that's something that's always been really fascinating to me, is how people that are completely untrained, they're not soldiers, they're just mothers or very ordinary people, and they're able to just carry themselves with such grace, such dignity, and survive things like walking. And if you look at the history of wars, in so many cases, just people be walking for hundreds of, not thousands of miles in the desert with very little water, just things that you just think are unfathomable. And how is this possible? And It's hard to summarize, but I really think that there are a couple of common denominators. One being you have to have hope, first and foremost. You have to have some level of belief in yourself that you will get to the other side. You're not going to get there with a defeatist attitude or a victim attitude, even, because there's no time for that. You're in a survival mode. And to survive, you have to believe that you can. So that is a really big part of it. I think a second big part of that is some sort of faith. I'm really yet to meet a survivor of any conflict that doesn't have some kind of faith, whether that be an Islamic faith, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever that may be. There is some sort of belief in something that's a higher power than themselves. And I think that probably is the number one thing where people really believe that God is on their side or the universe. Often in these countries, it is God. So God is on their side. And that really is a guiding light for many people. And I think when we used to blame religion for a lot of wars, but on the flip side of that, it's that when you have nothing, you can always have your faith, and that's something that no terrorist or a dictator can really take away from you. At least in your mind, you can hold on to that faith, and that gets people through so many unimaginable situations. And then it's, I guess the third one, it's being loved. It's having a connection to go back to. It's having a family to go back to, whether that's your immediate family, whether that's your husband or wife, whether that's your children, whatever that is, there's people outside of you that love you and depend on you. And I think for survivors that I know and people that have really survived torture, POWs, people that have just really unimaginable atrocities for days, months, years on end. And it's always, I think, a confluence of those three things that they're able to hold on to in their mind. And it's the small victories, I think, and those three being ones that no captor can take away from them. And I think that is we need more than ourselves to get through these situations.
Hmm. Hmm. Something else that I've been pondering is when you look at these beautifully ordinary, in the best sense, people who do extraordinary things, who become extraordinary as they're going through unimaginable things. Their greatness is not recognized by any metrics of success that we would apply to our lives, but their actions are just lights that emanate out of such deep shadows. And for a complete outsider who's been completely unscathed by any of the types of stories that you've reported on, just as a reader, my heart just is in cracked open wide. And as horrifying as these stories are, I also think they give such incredible hope for humanity, witnessing these individuals' resilience and how their grace and their strength. And in your view, Holly, how can we as a society better recognize and honor these quiet and often unseen heroes that exist in our communities, whether it's the global community, it could be in a community here, somewhere in LA, in a marginalized neighborhood. What lessons can we learn from these individuals that can help us all lead more meaningful lives?
And that's really a driving factor for me, at least about wanting to write about them because they're such incredible people. And that was a big inspiration because I would often read articles or books or things by people that had done extraordinary feats that had, I don't know, run 50 marathons in 20 days or whatever it is, or did these things. And that's all very good and well to be inspired by that. And I certainly wouldn't take anything away from that. But I remember thinking so much about these people who had done that and more, and bombs are being, dropped ahead of them. So that really compelled me to want to write more because these are names that we should know, and these are people that we should be looking up to. And I think that there is such a fixation today, and it's a double-edged sword. There is a beneficial side to it, but on the downside of having the digital space and so much at our fingertips, and there seems to be a kind of obsession with the materialistic of how many followers that you have on Instagram, or how many Birkin bags that you could display, or there's just this sort of sense of, I think, materialism that permeates not just the sort of the young generation, but going all the way up. Even if you go on TikTok and you'll look at the baby boomers, there's still this sense of materialism that I think that social media and that sort of drives, and a focus on 30 under 30 or whatever it is. But what about the people that go and do things after the age of 70, that start a business at 84? Those things that I think things that are equally as fascinating, if not more, that we don't focus on. And henceforth, that's why I really wanted to bring to light some of these stories, because they are the stories that you may not see on the Instagrams and the social media, and I think if we could just inject that a little bit more into our lives, of away from the bang flash, that can be incredibly inspiring for any of us, regardless of what age we are. And I think that I just hate seeing the pendulum swing so far in one direction, where being or projecting a certain image seems to be all that matters. And we're missing a little bit of that human connection. And I hope that with some of these stories, I can just peel back the layers into what matters in life. And I think that doesn't have to be in a foreign country, as you said, in our local communities, the people that we on the streets, the people you could volunteer at a homeless shelter, you could help at a pet adoption, whatever it is that speaks to you. And I say that when people ask me, well, what can I do? How do I make a difference? And I really think that the way that each individual makes a difference is finding what it is that it's important to you in life. So you may be really passionate about animals. You may be really passionate about children with disabilities. You may just, whatever that is, find that cause and really devote a part of yourself to that. And that might be in-person volunteering. That might be giving $5 a month to a certain organization that helps with that. Whatever that is, I just think that's the easiest way that we can make a difference in the world, is find that one thing. And it doesn't have to be 10, it can be one that really speaks to you, and just dedicating a portion of your life to that, and start there, and just have an open mind in reading different stories. And I just hope that we can get to a place a little bit with social media where it isn't so focused on the external and trying to impress one another.
Yes, and that at the very least, in the beginning, as people still have the focus on impressing others, hopefully what is thought of as a status symbol will start to shift. So instead of being like, "Ah, here's my 5 carat diamond," you whip out the 5 photos. Here's the 5 schools I helped build in some place in the world where they actually need schools. Yeah, that would be a beautiful thing for starters, when we shift what what actually flashing status means, right? Where it's actually makes a change. Ollie, you are not only an incredibly prolific writer, author of nonfiction and fiction, and a reporter, a journalist, you're also a keynote speaker. And I saw that one of the particular topics that you focus on being a speaker is communication. And effective communication is it's a cornerstone of navigating life, whether it's in work and private life, or particularly in the types of high stakes environments where you've worked, from negotiating with adversaries to bridging divides between very diverse groups. Your experiences certainly are a distillation of a master class in the art of communication. And I'd like to know more about some of the strategies you've developed to ensure, for example, clarity and conciseness in communication, and especially with very complex or often dangerous individuals. You've talked to warlords, you've talked to jihadis. So tell us a little bit more about some of the communication strategies that you have developed, and also how they may be applied in leadership or personal development.
Yeah, I think that none of us are perfect at communication, but it really is the centerpiece to why these conflicts happen and why they often drag on for so long, is because the communication just isn't there, and it wasn't there in the prevention stage, and it's not there during, and it's not there after, and so therefore the conflicts will flare up again inevitably. So I think that first and foremost, my objective always in covering conflicts is to hear as many sides as possible. And that doesn't mean that you have to, I'm not going to give a terrorist the same neutrality benefit as the victim. I do have, what's the word? I do have my human sensibilities when it comes to that. But I think that we have to listen to what all sides have to say and listen to their perspective. And I think that's something that sort of we collectively just in life often don't do enough, where we want to, is our way or the highway, or that we find ourselves down a political echo chamber and it's very hard to break out of that and to listen to a different perspective and reasonably and trying to understand where someone is coming from, even if we don't agree with them. And I think that is really a cornerstone of communication, regardless of your setting, whether that's sort of an argument you're in with your spouse or you're in a difficult situation in the workplace. We really just, we have to listen. And that is, again, as it is listening, we don't do a great job of active listening. I think that especially when we have our minds made up about situations and we want to put our perspective forward, that it's very hard to just stop and steady ourselves enough to listen. And so I think that is really just a big part of being a writer and journalist, is that listening part. And that does mean, sitting down with a warlord or a terrorist and not allowing myself to interrupt or object or get angry, or it's listening. And you'll find that these people, even though they seem spooky and mysterious and hidden away, they still want to have their perspective told. They love to talk. They love to hear themselves project. And so I think it's important that we gather that information and inform from as many different sides possible, because without that sense of understanding, the communication is just, it's never going to be on the same page to get to a point of peace. And that can be applied to the macro and the micro. And so for me, it's that active listening, it's being open to as many different perspectives as possible, and it's an ability to just take a step back and think of things without allowing yourself to be informed by preconceived ideas. And it's not always easy, but it just, communication is just the cornerstone of so much. And it's not something we're taught at school. I wish it should be. I'd much
But
rather
at
learn
home,
about,
for most of
yeah,
us parents, also most of the time
emotional,
have not taught us
yeah.
that.
Yeah. It's interesting though. I was having this discussion with a friend. I do think that we are in a different generation, obviously, now to our parents, where things weren't discussed at home, generally speaking. I'm very broad brush here, but most of my friends will share the same experiences, but where things just weren't discussed at home. As a teenage girl, you don't really talk about the hormonal changes that you're going through, or interest, or how that may, the opposite sex, whatever that may be. And I think about my baby now, and when she's a teenager, how different we are. We are so much more aware now as, millennials, or Gen X even, and Gen Y. But I think we're just so much more aware now of what communication means and how important that is, and how that open line of communication. And I just think that we have a sort of a really big leg up in just that knowledge of that maybe our parents didn't have, because they weren't discussions that they had amongst each other. They didn't have a huge amount of resources at their fingertips to learn, and it was a different time. And I think that we've very much evolved from that baby boomer generation to be hopefully a lot more of an open-minded communicators with our family and children.
I believe so. I see the examples also in my circles of friends who are having young children and how they raise them. And it is such a difference from also what my peers and I experienced when we were young. And like you said, parents didn't have the resources, they didn't communicate about it, their parents didn't know. It was just passed. Whatever was passed down kept getting passed down, right? And I think what you also just mentioned before, the active listening also in your families, whether it's with your children's, whether it's with your significant other, that is so hugely important as well. Truly listening, not in your mind preparing what you're going to answer or counter argument, and to actually respond versus reacting, right? Which just spirals a conversation into an argument. Something else you explore when you talk about communication is the power of storytelling and how actually impactful storytelling can connect you with and engage with your audience and make also difficult or complex ideas relatable. And I think that is such a key to communication as well. We see it in our news media environment, we see it in the social media environment, or even people just having discussions. As soon as something gets a little too complex, people shut down. So, what are some of the tools from storytelling that you can share with us that are helpful to actually engage with our audience, whether it's a one on one with somebody that might have very different ideas about politics, life, religion, whatever it is, child rearing than us, and we want to engage in a meaningful conversation? Or whether it's actually standing in front of a group of people and trying to convey your point of view. And that might be actually a complex topic.
Think, first of all, being personable, speaking from a place of personal experience, when we can talk about something that we either experienced or it's a story that's relatable that someone close to us may have experienced. But I think injecting that sense of personability, so you're not just kind of reiterating a very dry or distant sort of statistic or fact. I think as much as we can bring ourselves and our world into a situation, and I think there's a sense of if you can be a little bit vulnerable, people will respond to that. Of course, you don't have to tell your life story, but just that sense of bringing up something that's in your mind that you went through. I think that it's hard to shy away from that, or it's hard to dissect that when somebody's gone through that. So I think if you can back up whatever you're trying to convey with something that is relatable, that is a really big step forward. And similarly with the sort of work that I do, I like to take these macro, a big war or a big attack or a big conflict that's happening, but instead of just reiterating numbers or statistics or a UN report, being able to tell a micro story, the story of a family that can really then tell that broader picture in a way that is very understandable, very relatable, and where people can create a visual in their mind. And I think that's the real key is giving somebody sort of the tools and the imagery to create that visual in their mind, and that's really where that storytelling aspect, comes into it, because I think that can melt down walls a lot. I think if we're going to be very analytical, how many of us like sort of lie in bed reading policy papers or even medical journals because they're often very analytical, but, generally speaking, as humans, we're going to gravitate to a story, and so I think that relatability and that personability is key for that.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And also, it filters in when people start to relate, they start to find common ground. That's also something you emphasize instead of standing across each other as adversaries to actually sit down, find common ground in order to be able to achieve the bigger picture goal, which is actually to resolve conflict peacefully. So I would like to hear, can you tell us about a personal experience you had where you just needed to find common ground in order to move a conversation forward or achieve a certain goal where you were sitting with somebody who was just somebody who you, unless you would have been a war reporter in that specific situation, you would never connect with in on the other parts of your life, and how you actually found common ground. Is there a particular story that comes to mind?
Gosh. No, I wouldn't call a story that sort of comes to mind in terms of listening to it and what could be an adverse point of view in Afghanistan. And I was interviewing, he was a fairly senior sort of Taliban figure in the government, and he was about my age. And so he'd really grown up since a teenager with the American occupation. And he was not a nice person, involved in shooting down planes and was proud of that. But the point was I had to listen to him, and he said something that really stuck with me that I reiterate, because again, this is not a black and white situation. I remember he said to me, "You're Australian?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "Imagine if I went into Australia and then started recruiting Australians to kill other Australians. Wouldn't you want to fight me back?" And so I think that's hard when you're a patriotic person as we are. We're both immigrants. We love America. We wouldn't be here otherwise. And many of my, friends and people I love who served, and absolutely they were following orders. But you have to look at the flip side of things too. Again, the other perspective, and understand why the fight back was maybe as vicious as it was. And yeah, just those comments there, I think, are an important perspective in looking at that war, but overall occupations in general that we often don't think about. And so that's something that's always just stuck with me.
Yeah, that certainly is food for thought. Just to see things from entirely different perspectives, to move out of our regular mindset and actually get into a flow where we're receptive to learning more, where we're in a state of curiosity and not just judgment, even though at times it may be really hard. So, something that's certainly mind opening, to use this as a bridge to a completely different topic, is psychedelic experiences, particularly those involving what are called sacred plant medicines like Iboga, which comes from the African continent, often lead to profound personal spiritual insights. And you actually had an experience in Mexico, which you also wrote about, a brilliant article where you described your own experience with Iboga. And just to give a little bit of context for those who are not familiar with it, so Iboga is considered probably the strongest psychedelic known to man. And now you'll tell us about it, Holly. I have not experienced it, but from what I know is that it is physically extremely intense as well as psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. You want to experience it with very knowledgeable practitioners. There are also potential health risks, people who have had the experience, including some individuals that I know personally who have served this country, served the United States, came back and were dealing with severe depression and severe PTSD, went down all the conventional routes, nothing helped. We're talking about people who literally were on the edge of life, who were not willing to live life anymore, who then heard about Iboga as a last resort. Okay, and everything changed, literally healed physical conditions, psychological conditions. That's what they report. So, can you share with us how you were led to this medicine, to Iboga? And can you share about this experience and also how it impacted your experience and your understanding of yourself and the world around you?
Yeah, absolutely. Headpiece coming up. My baby just woke up. 1 second.
Think that's
She's
all
like,
right then?
"Tiring." It's like she went back to sleep.
All right,
She's not
she's
staring.
good.
Hi, baby. What you doing? She's still a sleepyhead.
Oh, good girl. She is so precious.
Raven, you're okay. You're okay. Let me just comfort her.
Yeah.
All right, mommy's on the side. Okay. You're okay. She's gonna come and say quick hi to Auntie Ariana. That's you. Then mommy guys, I don't see? All right.
Hi, Head.
She's oh, you silly baby. You say hello. So this was my experience was in I want to say April of 2022. So I'd been living in Afghanistan, obviously through that turbulent period of the change of government, and then I was running back, keep talking, and then I'd gone to Ukraine, was there during the invasion, and that first sort of monthly, really harrowing a war there, and the cameraman that I knew had died. And it was really horrible sort of time to be there. And I, I was a real mess when I came back. And I had a friend of mine who was down in Mexico and basically said, "You need to come down and do this Iboga." And I knew about it from friends of mine, again, who had served. And I had I resisted to it that I think a terrifying process even. It was a little bit of a terrifying process, but I knew okay. But then I was okay. It's okay. Come on, you're okay. Deep breath. Deep breath. Okay. Deep breath. You're okay. You're okay. Just a little bit. April of 2021, I come back and I justified it in my head as well. Maybe I can go into a story on this and see what it's all about. Obviously, it's still legal in the US, so I had to go to Mexico, and it was a really nice setting. It was out in the middle of nowhere. I want to say 2 hours south of Tijuana, and I didn't do too much research in advance, other than one friend of mine who had done it said to me, "You have to be okay with dying." I think at that point in my life, I felt like such a man that I was, and so I'd done some psychedelics in the past, like DMT, and I think I never really let myself go, if that makes sense, where I just panicked. And so I was determined to not let that happen this time and just to go with the flow. And yeah, so basically, the people that were all there at this place were very much on the last resort of heavy addiction. And I was really the only person there that was doing it for private spiritual readings. Right, man. Hang on a minute. Give me one second. He's just here. Okay. Right? My God. It's Hitcho. 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 And then deep breath. So anyway, so I do what they do in adults cognitive addiction. They do microdosing, whereas for me, because I was healthy and didn't wasn't taking anything, I could do what they call flood dosing. And so I was like, just give me as much as I can. And so I did that. And so I guess you learn as you go. But I was a bit of a slow metabolizer. So I'm taking some and it's really having no effect. And then I'm thinking more and more and more. And then I go in and lie in my pillow. And the first thing I notice about this, as it's slowly kicking in, is how it's like everything has a gloss over it. Nature has this gloss over it. And it's like this beautiful painting where it's a beautiful outdoor setting and the stars and the mountains, but it's extra beautiful. And then the second part to that is the only way I can describe it is animal brain. It's almost like how I think an animal must hear things, where you sense that my ability to hear things from conversations from 300 feet away was like almost crystal clear. It was just incredible. I could hear things at a distance, like the horse's neighing, the ruffle of the curtain really sounded like a door slamming. And yet, when a nurse comes in and checks your pulse every hour, when the nurse would come in and be right close to me, I could barely hear. So it just reminded me of how an animal brain must function. Way back, it was just incredible to me that our body kind of remains in very different places. And then throughout this experience, and you're in this for a long time. This isn't a quick trip. It's not an hour or 2 hours. It's 12 hours, 13 hours. It's a really long trip. And so it kicks in. And then the other things on the sound thing that I noticed was that I could hear, I know this sounds crazy, but I could literally hear my body working, my internal organs functioning. Like, it's hard to describe, but it literally could. It was just the most incredible thing. And yet your whole body just goes to mush, like crawling to the bathroom. It just, I couldn't put a hand in front of my eyes. But anyway, as this, and every experience is so different, but as this sort of trip kicked in, basically it was this host of my life. And he is drawing out for me literally just memories of people and places and just like literally pulling it out like a card from a pack of decks. But the pack of decks was my brain and reminding me of things and reminding me of people in my life. And it was just extraordinary that, yeah, it was just this crystal clear visions and having conversations with people that had passed that I never, been able to really have goodbye conversations with. Just things like that, and you look at your life and you look at your experiences, but you're looking at it from this incredibly empathetic lens, both to yourself and to everybody around you. And that's really, I think, what the healing power of that is being able to, yeah, to not judge yourself and others. And it really just, it renders open that empathy channel that I think we close a lot of in our lives and towards ourselves and others. And that really came open for me, and questions, lingering questions I'd had about relationships at that point and things that I was holding on to that didn't serve me. And I was getting very crystal clear answers on what they were. This wasn't like a smooth sailing happy journey either. One minute you're laughing, then you're crying, then you're throwing up. So it certainly can be very tumultuous in your body. But I was literally also seeing visions of my brain rewiring itself,
Mm,
which is
mm.
really one of the gifts of Iboga. Is that's really what it does. It resets a lot of those pathways back to childhood. And you feel like a child at some point that can't, hold a glass of water on their own, because then it's your brain doing this healing work. And it was just, to me, it was extraordinary. And to that point, the of all the things I'd done in my life, it was certainly the most extraordinary thing I'd done, that our body just had this ability, that this plant had this ability to just draw out these things from us and give us the answers and the clarity that I think I needed in so many situations. So yeah, to me it was incredibly healing. It was challenging, and as I said, it lasts a long time and it was tumultuous, but it gave me a lot of answers that I knew I needed, and helped heal my own relationship with family members. And yeah, I just it changed the way that I think a lot in life.
Yes, and it fascinates me. And as you mentioned, Iboga is known also quite well for the apparent effect it has on addiction. And we're talking very strong addictions, opiate addictions, heroin addictions, and the likes, where people experience treatment with Iboga and literally right after the treatment, they are cured from the addiction. They don't even have withdrawals. And I know there's a gentleman, Dr. Martin Polanco, who also he's a doctor. He offers these treatments where they're legal in Mexico.
Mm,
He has
mm.
treated thousands and thousands of people, amongst them, I think, 800 US veterans who, again, many of them who were at the threshold of life and death, literally, because they couldn't take it anymore. And that's why Iboga and it has caught the interest also of all kinds of different institutions. And I think you even have the Veterans Affairs looking into it, the DOD. There's a particularly interesting documentary about it. I'm actually just online and we'll find the title of it. All right. And it is,
It's just mind blowing that a plant, just yeah, we know this that if they're in theoretically, but yeah, that this a plant just has this ability to do this to a human being in the most profound way, of things that sitting in broad daylight I couldn't recall or remember. But this plant was able to pinpoint so many things in my life and give me so much healing in just personally and with relationships.
yeah, these accounts like yours, Holly, they just fascinate me. And it's interesting. Obviously, when we're speaking about Iboga, obviously this plant does not grow on the African continent to heal us Westerners from our PTSD and from our addictions. It has those effects, and that's amazing. But this is a plant that has been used for hundreds, if not more years by indigenous people, and for healing and also for optimizing. It's part of their culture. And I just found actually the title of this documentary. I saw a screening of a fantastic director. Her name is Lucy Walker. And the movie is called Of Night and Light, the story of Iboga and Ibogaine. I'll also link that in the show notes.
Yeah, I'd
Um,
love to see that.
Yes, it's a fantastic movie, and even if I'm saying it correctly, I think there was a study published in the meantime also in the highly regarded journal Nature, and this was study gentleman who initiated it. His name is Dr. Nolan. He's from Stanford University. You'll see him in this documentary as well. And as you can imagine, if you're highly established within academia, you're really going out on a limb when you're not only talking about, but actually conducting studies with something like Iboga. And what he shared was that he and his colleagues were just, their minds were boggled that at every turn they found out, oh my goodness, so it's good for this. It has a positive effect of this. It's healing for this. It's good for, wow, where does this end? And apparently they did a brain scan where they saw that after one treatment, I'm not sure if I'm getting the facts together completely correctly here, in retrospect, remembering this, but again, watch the documentary, where they said that literally the brain matter, there was more brain matter after one treatment because they found this out by accident. So a scan before and a scan right after. So anyhow, we're living at a really interesting time.
And just as a side benefit, there was a guy there when I was there who was just microdosing, and he does it to learn languages because it sets your body, it resets his brain back into that very spongy childhood mode again. And so he microdoses to speed learn languages. So also another benefit.
Yes. Yeah, and as we have a clinic here in Los Angeles, Gateway Clinics, where we offer ketamine IV treatment, a very different medicine from Iboga. Ketamine, of course, is a compound out of the lab. It's legal in all 50 US states as long as it's prescribed by a doctor. So we have a team of nurses and a doctor working with us. It's also proven extremely beneficial for individuals dealing with PTSD, depression, anxiety, people who are working through extreme trauma, even chronic pain, cluster headaches, suicidal ideation. It's a compound that can snap people right out of these thought loops that even if, okay, I don't want to be thinking this, I shouldn't be thinking this, you can't just switch it off. And ketamine is amongst the compounds that may help with that and may help people get out of these thought loops. And what you just said is so interesting about the guy who used ibogaine actually to speed learn languages and to put oneself into this childlike state. And you having your lovely little raven here, who at 9 months, as you shared before we hit record, she's already
Frankie,
standing.
here's your baby. You want something to play with?
Yes,
Which means you
she, she is so
deep,
alert.
deep breaths. Deep breath.
She is a
She's
good
got a
girl.
remote control to play with.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, you becoming a mother, witnessing that has also been so beautiful, Holly. And I'm not a mother myself, but I witness it in friends. I have an auntie, and I see what a transformative experience that is. That one that redefines love, patience, and
Mhm.
also resilience.
It
And
does.
yeah, and for you, Holly, having had this rich life, all these different experiences, growing up in Australia, immigrating to the US at a very young age, building your life here all on your own, metamorphosing from being one of the most read Hollywood reporters to becoming a war reporter, also doing all of that on your own against the Fox News machinery that wanted to keep you in place as the successful Hollywood columnist that you were, and writing all these incredible books, experiencing one of the strongest psychedelics known to man so far, and experiencing motherhood. How has motherhood changed the way you see the world? Especially
Yeah.
yeah, and especially after having been in so many different places where innocence and safety is not guaranteed. How has Little Raven influenced your outlook on
Yeah. Oh gosh, in so many ways. It's a depth of love for me that I just didn't know what was possible. She's just, yeah, it's extraordinary. And she's really my greatest spiritual teacher and in again, love, kindness, patience, all those things that I think being around her really brings out that for me in the best possible light. I think that going into motherhood, people have a lot of opinions, but disregarding those about the sort of work that I do, you can't do that as a mother. Often guys who I didn't know would say that to me, which made me angry, but another story. But for just for me personally, is that I didn't know how I'd feel about the work, being a mom, if I still wanted to do that or wanted to do something lighter with my life. But yeah, the love for what I do very much hasn't gone away. And I'm just as driven as I ever was to continue to tell those stories and to one day make sure that Raven is very aware of how the world works and the world around her. And my greatest hope for her is just to be a kind human. That's really my only hope for her. So I'm still very much driven to doing that work, and I think motherhood only enhances that work because I think we need mothers working in conflict zones and war zones because I think mothers can often come with a very different perspective, or women in general, just with a sense of empathy. And so I think if you have that in you, yeah, again, it's just hard to turn away. And I think being a mom is only going to enhance my work and make it better and and drive me to give as much justice through the storytelling to people who will never see it as much as possible. So she's really a light in that, and she makes me wonder what I did with when I thought that I was busy. Because now just every spare second you're trying to make the most of every second you have in the day because you're so much more limited with how much I can do, but really trying to make every minute count when I can, and then when I'm not working, obviously to be present with her and give her the love and attention she needs. And so it's just a balance, but it's extraordinary to just to have this little being. So, and I think it's important to acknowledge you'd be a little bit remiss. I think there is an identity crisis that you go through to some degree. I think a lot of women experience it, and there is this little slither of you that certainly doesn't want your old life back, but you mourn your old life and the freedom and the time and just being able to go out the door and go for a run, which is certainly a lot more of production now. Yeah, sweetheart. But I think that, yeah, we do struggle with our identities, and I still struggle with that a little bit as a mom, still trying to do what I did before in a different way, but yeah, I think it's just it's a huge blessing, and I'm just very blessed to have Raven in my life, and I know she's cranky now, but generally speaking, she's pretty chill, calm baby, so I'm very lucky.
Yes, and I think you are very lucky. She is beautiful. I had the privilege to meet her in person. And what you just brought up is also so important, Holly. And I hear from a lot of women that are experiencing that. Obviously, they love their children, they love being mothers, and they also mourn their previous life. And that's okay. You're not a bad woman or a bad mother for that. That's akin to, and people are now learning this. Thank goodness we're talking about these things. It's similar to what used to be vilified when women went through the depression after giving birth. It's which is also a very natural thing. It doesn't have to happen, but it can happen. You're going through huge physical changes, hormonal changes, postpartum depression. It's something that can be quite normal. And to talk about it, to normalize it, to also talk about what you just mentioned that yes, women grieve their previous lives, which doesn't mean they don't embrace and love their new life, but it's necessary to talk about it, to normalize it, to not vilify it. And in that way, everybody can grow better, heal better, and function better.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think and I think to a bit of degree and okay, all right, here's the band, you've got it, it's not in your mouth, though. I think to a degree, again, and maybe it's just a social media algorithm, but I think motherhood can get a little bit of a bad rap on where there's a big focus in these snippets we see on Instagram of the sleepless nights or the challenges with this or the horrors of pregnancy or whatever it is. And I think that if I knew a lot of this stuff, we don't eat sweetie, we don't eat trans. I know, I know. Yeah, give it this one. You're okay. I know, I know. I think that there's focus on a lot of the challenges and the horrors and the hardships, but yeah, I just there's also just there's so many beautiful aspects of it that certainly outweigh a lot of those challenges.
Well, Holly, I am so grateful for your time. I am especially grateful for little Raven's time. And I know I have gone over my allotment. I'm sure little Raven is hungry, wants the attention of her mommy. To conclude this really incredible conversation, Holly, for people who'd like to learn more about you, would like to connect with you, and also how can they do so? And also, what kinds of offerings, aside your incredible books and your journalistic work,
Yeah.
you may want to highlight here that we didn't talk about?
Yeah. So I have a Substack, so I really appreciate the support for that. And the paid subscriptions is, what sort of enables me to continue doing a lot of this work and research. The easiest way to remember it all is just to go to my website at Hollie HOLIEMCKAY.com. That will have links to my Substack. Please subscribe to my social media, to where you can buy the books and speaking information if that's of interest, and my reel and things there. So it all kind of lives there. So yeah, I love connecting with people. I love getting feedback on what people want to learn more about, hear more about, the stories that resonate. So I just love to connect, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be back here on the podcast.
Well, I'm grateful to you and for everything you do, for who you are, Holly. Always wonderful to connect with you. I can't wait to see you and Little Raven in person again soon. Yes.
Yes. She's looking forward to Auntie Ariana time too, aren't you? Yes, you are.
A little love.
Yeah.
Goodbye to you. See you soon. And Holly, again, thank you so much for coming on the Superhumanized podcast today.
Thank you.